So nice, so beautiful. That was Shomer Yisrael, the guardian of Israel, from the Psalm, the Garden of Israel, neither slumbers nor sleeps, by the Shira Choir. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? It's great to be with you. Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us on this fine Tuesday night? The World Series is on, but we're here learning. It's not going to be a very long class, but Dodger Blue, baby. Let's go Dodgers. Who's with us tonight? Carol Chappelle from Cleveland. Welcome, Carol. Paula from Chicago. Melissa from Great Neck. Stephen from New Hampshire. Yehudit from South Carolina. Rochelle from Modesto, Grace from Miami, Nancy from North Carolina, Harold Black says hi, Salanina, Jill from Illinois, Matt from Wisconsin, James from Indianapolis, Pam from Nashville, Nancy loves the music, Stephanie says Aleichem Shalom, Linda from Florida, Fred says Shalom, Jeff says he didn't receive his mezuzah. That's not us, that's myzuzah.org, but reach out to them and tell them what's going on. For those who don't know, we have a partnership with myzuzah.org, myzuzah.org. If you don't have a mezuzah, if you're a Jew and you don't have a mezuzah on your house, they will provide you with a kosher scroll, $80 value, for free. myzuzah.org. Nina will put the link in the comments. I think the code is accidental. That tells them that you came from us and you can get the free mezuzah. They are very good about that. Not sure what happened there to the fellow who didn't get his, Jeff. Anyway, Michael says shalom. James says go Dodgers. Attaboy. Rebecca's with us from New York. Mitch Blumenthal, what's up, my holy brother? Great to see you in from Sarasota. Alan from Maryland. Carol says, go Dodgers. Yeah. Nicholas also, go Dodgers. I love it. And Brandon with us from Knoxville. Lucy from Minnesota. It's so good to see you, Lucy. Thank you for reaching out to us earlier. We appreciated that. There's the comment from Nina with the link to my Zuzah. Charles from Louisiana. Fred says mezuzah. Yeah, but the organization is called My Zuzah. That's why we're pronouncing it their way. They connect people with mezuzahs. Who's over there on the YouTube side? Lindsay in Cincinnati, Miracia from Atlanta, and Lynn from North Texas. All right, let's be efficient tonight. So we can get back to the World Series, as it were. But we've got some really beautiful teachings here. Where are we holding? We're on page 78, Ayin Ches, of Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We're in chapter 7, so we're really getting there. There's 10 chapters, I'm pretty sure, in this tractate. We're in chapter 7. I believe it was, there's 8 Mishnas in this chapter, and we're going to complete our discussion of the second Mishnah and begin and complete our discussion of the third Mishnah in chapter 7. We've been talking about neighboring courtyards. Each courtyard, any courtyard that has multiple houses in it, needs an Eruv. The residents of the courtyard need to establish an Eruv. Each house in the courtyard, this is always the case of multiple houses in a courtyard, single house in a courtyard doesn't need an Eruv, but 2 or more houses do, and all the houses in the courtyard have to join. Every house has to deposit a little food in a common basket, keep that basket in one of the houses, and then everyone in the courtyard can carry objects in and out of their houses to the courtyard on Shabbos. What if we have 2 such courtyards neighboring each other with a wall in between them? That's what we've been discussing. And there are situations depending on what's going on with that wall, whether there's an opening in it, what type of wall, how we're addressing that wall. In some situations, it is going to be prohibited for the 2 courtyards to join together to make a joint Eruv so that they could carry between the courtyards. That's if there's a significant wall between them and no opening. And we defined yesterday a significant wall as one which is at least 10 handbreadths high and 4 handbreadths thick. However, we can diminish that wall, and it can either become permitted to make a joint Eruv if we establish some kind of a passageway between the 2 courtyards, as if we had an opening in the wall, or sometimes we diminish that wall to the point where even though there's a wall there, looks like a wall, seems like a wall, feels like a wall, but that wall becomes legally insignificant. And at that point, it's as if there's only one courtyard. If the wall becomes insignificant, then it is prohibited to form separate Eruvin, and it becomes obligated to form a joint Eruv if people are going to carry in and out of their houses on Shabbos. All the households in both courtyards have to join in the joint Eruv. That's our general topic. Yesterday we saw that even a very tall wall, a wall that was 20 handbreadths high or even 20 cubits high, a really tall wall, could be diminished, and we could create a passageway between the 2 courtyards if we simply put ladders on both sides of the tall wall. And then if the wall itself was more than 4 handbreadths thick so that you could walk along the top of the wall, the ladders wouldn't have to sort of, reach the top at the same point. But if the wall wasn't quite that thick, then the 2 ladders would have to join, as it were, going from one side to the other, reach at the same point, or at least within 3 handbreadths of each other. And then those 2 ladders, because you could go up one side and down the other, it would create a passageway between the courtyards, and they would be permitted to create that joint Eruv. Today, our first teaching, Rav Nachman says, in the name of Rabba Bar Avu, that if we have a projection on the wall, so it's like we have a shelf that sticks out of the wall, a projection, and we have a little bit of a figure here. All right, so we have this idea here. Let me make that even a little bigger. Rotate. There we go. So if we have this situation here, for the time being, never mind if you put a ladder up near the top of the wall, okay, so then the ladder's at the top of the wall. If you have this projection, this shelf that sticks out of the wall, so then that can be considered like the ground if there's a ladder that goes up to the projection. How is that going to work? The projection has to be at least 4 by 4 handbreadths in area. And that would be, then all of a sudden it's similar to its own domain. But if that platform is connected to the ground with a ladder, and that ladder, its rungs are within 3 handbreadths of each other, as we've learned, the principle of lavud, connection, right? Things that are within 3 handbreadths of each other are legally, for certain purposes, considered to be touching. Right, so since the ground is within 3 handbreadths of the first rung, which is within 3 handbreadths of the next rung, so it's like the ground is connected to the next rung and the next rung and the next rung. Then you get to that platform, so it's as if that platform is on the ground. And since that platform is within 10 handbreadths of the top of the wall, this accounts as diminishing the wall. And in certain cases, that would actually render it as if the wall isn't there, in which case not only would it be permitted to create the joint Eruv for the two courtyards that have this situation, now it's going to become obligated because it's as if the wall wasn't there. The wall was diminished, and the whole top of the wall becomes available because it is not a separate domain. It is not really even separating two courtyards. It becomes an insignificant wall, and now the people are, have one courtyard. Why do they have this platform and the ladder? Because that's what they wanted. They wanted it to be a joint courtyard, and so they built that platform and ladder for that purpose. If a wall is significant, now we know that a wall can be successfully diminished if the top of the wall is less than 10 handbreadths from the ground, right? We said a significant wall is 10 handbreadths or more tall and at least 4 handbreadths wide. So now what if we have a wall that's 20 handbreadths tall? So then no matter where you put this platform, it's not going to be less than 10 handbreadths from both the ground and the top of the wall. So in that situation, what do? If this is your goal that you want to join the courtyards, so now you can do a double platform. Right? So the lower platform is connected to the ground because each of the rungs is within 3 handbreadths of each other and to the ground. And then the same deal going up to the second platform. And this little structure is going to make it as if the wall isn't there. This is a kind of legal fiction, but it's not such a fiction because a person can easily walk up those platforms and ladders, as it were, to get to the top. So we've been talking a little bit about the metaphoric kind of aspect of what the sages are talking about here. And yesterday and the day before, we were discussing the wall as a barrier between neighbors. And sometimes we can think, when we're in a polarized climate, right, where people have really come to disagree on issues so strongly that there are these kind of metaphoric, sort of pseudo-spiritual barriers between them, that people just feel they can no longer communicate with people that, before these issues came up, they really cared about them. And now relationships are breaking up because people can't bridge these divides, can't get over these walls. That's one metaphor. Today, because we're going to be talking about, taking ladders over walls, and then in the third Mishnah, we're going to be talking about ditches and what happens when there's a ditch between two courtyards. I think in the metaphoric, dimension of these teachings, we might think of it a little differently, right? If we're talking about ladders, that's kind of overcoming highs, and when we put a little bridge across a ditch, that's overcoming a low. So we're accustomed to talking about overcoming lows, right? Things go badly in life and we want to keep an even keel and know that this too shall pass and a better day will come. We just got to get through this moment and keep on trucking and things are going to get better. Why would we need to overcome highs? Is that really something we need to overcome when things are going really well? What we want to do there is remember what it felt like and, remember this moment. And, it's a good thing to do when we're at a simcha, when we're at a wedding or, a bris or some kind of a party, a great event, a bar mitzvah. Oh, look, the whole family is gathered here. Get that mental snapshot and try to remember it. It doesn't seem like something that needs to be overcome. And yet, life is, if we're being realistic about life, there's two aspects of the highs in our lives, the good moments, that actually do need to be overcome. One is that, weddings and bar mitzvahs and circumcisions and, joyful events in people's lives, graduations, holiday dinners, whenever lots of family members gather, let's say in normal non-COVID times, those bring their own pressures, don't they? And sometimes when families gather and lots of friends gather, stuff comes out that can make it difficult for people. And so there is a certain aspect of needing to overcome those high moments so that we come away from them intact and with our relationships intact. And there's another aspect of the highs in our life that need to be overcome, which is, sometimes when things are going well, we can get a little full of ourselves. we can start to think that it's because we're really with it, and we've worked so hard and we're so good at it and we're so smart and we've made all the arrangements properly and things are good, as a testament to our prowess. And of course, that can lead to trouble as well. So just as we should keep in mind when we're in the low points of life, this too shall pass. Let's just bridge this moment, get through it, keep our relationships and ourselves intact. So too should we remember the same thought when we're in the high points of life. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslov talked about acquiring that skill. That life is very much like a roller coaster. I think he talked about it like a train that's going up and down hills. And it's a skill. It's a skill that we get better at it the more we practice it, learning how to ascend and going into the good parts of our lives and keeping our humility and keeping our relationships and understanding that this too is temporary. And then also getting that skill into our skill set of how to deal with the lows. And the better we get at ascending, the better we'll get at descending as well. So that's that metaphoric dimension that I think we should keep in mind as we're talking about overcoming walls and in a moment overcoming ditches. All right, let's continue. So we made that double platform, allows us to diminish a wall, as it were. Sometimes it takes a few steps, right, to diminish those highs so that we understand who we are and what we're about, and maybe a little help from our friends in keeping us humble as well. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, how tall a ladder... So if we've got a wall, a certain size wall, and we're going to put a ladder on it, and say we're going to put ladder on both sides, two ladders, one on each side of the wall. So how tall does the ladder have to be? I mean, it seems like, well, the ladder needs to go to the top of the wall. It's a simple question, but it's not such a simple question. So let's say that we've got a wall, which is going to be a significant wall, 10 cubits. That's a big wall, right? 10 cubits, that's like a 15-foot high wall. So how tall would the ladder need to be for a wall that is 10 cubits high? The answers are given here in terms of hand breadths, but it's the same. The numbers are going to work out the same. So I'd like to imagine a real significant wall, a 15-foot high wall. How are we going to overcome such a wall? Well, if you've got a 10 units of anything, so we're going to say a 10-cubit wall, says Rav Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, you're going to need a 14-cubit ladder. Where does he get that? And we have a better illustration here, actually, in the Koren Talmud. And you can see if you put that ladder at a 45-degree angle, which is not an angle we typically associate with leaning a ladder against a wall, but some of the ladders that they used in ancient times were a little bit more akin to stairways than to ladders. And indeed, they should be in this discussion, because when we're talking about putting a ladder on a wall, it has to have an air of permanence to it. You can't just lean a ladder there, which is the type of ladder that can easily be picked up and moved away. As we've seen, like to put a basin just to, an inverted bucket at the bottom of the wall, which would bring the top of the bucket within 10 handbreadths of the top of the wall, if it was a much shorter wall than what we're talking about now, that wouldn't work because the bucket is it's too insubstantial. Its position at the foot of that wall is too temporary, too ephemeral. But a ladder, which is a heavy ladder, and particularly a ladder which is shaped more like a stairway, okay, that's heavy. That's a real heavy object. And when we lean it against that wall, it has that air of permanence that we can, that the sages will rule that does diminish that ladder. So at a 45-degree angle, if it's 10 cubits high, that ladder is going to come out 10 cubits. Its base is going to be 10 cubits from the base of the wall. If you do the Pythagorean theorem on this, I guess it's going to be 14. Does it work out that way? It must. 10 squared, the square root of 200, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. I know the geometry people are rolling, the non-geometry people rolling their eyes. The point is, a 14-cubit ladder, says Rav Huna, is what Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel is what you're going to need. Says Rav Yosef, no, you don't need a 14-foot ladder. A 13-cubit ladder will do, because you don't have to actually reach the top of the wall. You just have to get near the top of the wall, and then you can, climb over. Says Abaye, and this is why they were talking in handbreadths, not cubits. Says Abaye, an 11. So now let's go back to handbreadths. It's a much shorter wall. He says that an 11 handbreadth ladder will work. Why? Because it will get within 3 handbreadths of the top of the wall. And as we've seen, something which is within 3 handbreadths of something else, a partition within 3 handbreadths of another partition, it's as if it's a closed partition. The gap doesn't count. And likewise, a ladder that reaches within 3 handbreadths of the top of the wall, it's as if it reached the top of the wall. And then Abaye, that was Abaye saying 11, and Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, says actually 7 is enough. And here we can use this figure. So we've been talking like this in terms of the ladder. Ooh, okay, never mind that. So in terms of these ladders, so that the biggest one that gets to the top, you can imagine that it's at more of a 45-degree angle. Then the next biggest one comes within 1 handbreadth. That shorter one would be the 11 handbreadth long ladder that comes within 3 handbreadths of the top. And then the shortest one is only 7 handbreadths long, and it also comes within 3 handbreadths of the top of the wall because it's a vertical ladder right up against the wall. Usually people don't put a ladder right on a wall with no angle at all. Obviously, it could fall away from the wall. Yet, such a ladder could be used to diminish a wall. How? Obviously, that ladder would need to get attached to the wall. And we've seen that many times, fire escapes. A vertical ladder is attached to a wall, and that would allow us to get over the wall. And it could be used as a passageway and to diminish the wall so that the courtyards could be joined. Rabbah says in the name of Rabbi Chia, we could also use the trunk of a palm tree and lean it against the wall. Now, people don't typically use the trunk of a palm tree as a ladder, but it could be used that way. And because the trunk of a palm tree is so heavy, it certainly has that air of permanence that when you lean it up against the wall, that's not going anywhere. Nobody's going to move it. And so it could be used. It would be a valid diminishing of the wall for joining the courtyards. Rav Yosef said to Rabbah, what if we had a dual ladder, like 2 ladders, which are skinny ladders, right? They're not 4 handbreadths wide, which would be a normal width for a ladder. Each of the ladders is very skinny, 1 or 2 handbreadths wide. But between them, between each rung, there's some kind of a soft material. So this is a very, very odd question. And so the ladders are thin. They're kind of thin ladders, thinner than we would normally use. And so he's got this, this odd thing where he's got 2 ladders and he's connecting the 2 ladders with a soft material like hay or, woven straw that if you tried to step on it, it would break and you'd fall through it. So, okay, Rabbah says, yeah, that's no good because people tend to go up the middle of a ladder. And if you're telling me that the rungs in the middle are too soft to hold someone's weight, so no, that ladder doesn't work. So then Rav Yosef says, oh, okay, well then how about a thin ladder, but we're going to widen the rungs to get to the appropriate width with some soft material on the outside. If you stepped on it, you'd fall. But in the middle, where people tend to walk, it would be stable and sturdy. And Rabbah says, okay, you could do that because it's the nature of people to go up the middle. Now, this is a weird interchange. I mean, one way to understand it is, well, this is very hypothetical. Nobody, would try to widen a ladder with material that is unsafe to climb on, but hypothetically, legally speaking, this ought to work. But then Rav Steinsaltz explains that later commentators, sort of the Gaonim, who are active in that period sort of between the year 500 to the year 1000 of the Common Era, they said, no, what was actually being discussed here is not that the ladder has this unsubstantial stuff attached to it, but rather that the wall is not sturdy. The wall, let's say, is made out of woven reed mats, kind of held in place. And if you lean the ladder against it, the wall would be unstable and the wall might fall down. And it would be dangerous to lean a ladder and climb up that ladder. And so Rabbah says, no, so that does not count. A ladder that could knock down the wall, this is not a stable situation. But then Rav Yosef says, well, if most of the partition is soft and unstable, but there is a stable hard part that holds up the mats around it, and you lean the ladder on that, would that be a valid passageway between the courtyards? And Rabbah says yes. And that's a much more logical way to understand this interchange between Rav Yosef and Rabbah. Rav Yosef asks Rabbah another question. What if the ladder is very narrow? See, we're saying that the rungs of the ladder really need to be 4 handbreadths wide for this ladder to count as an entranceway to the other courtyard. So let's say we have this narrow ladder, and now we're going to widen the rungs and make them the necessary width. We're going to put the ladder up against the wall, sort of attach the ladder to the wall. It's going to be a vertical ladder attached to the wall. And the way we're going to widen the rungs is to carve out grooves in the wall, sort of around the rungs. And so is it enough if we carve out these grooves until the top groove is within 10 handbreadths of the top of the wall? Is that good enough? And Rabbah says, no. Climbing grooves up a wall, that's kind of awkward. That's not really a good ladder. It's hard to hold on to. It's not stable. So if you're going to do that, then you need to make your grooves go all the way up to the top of the wall, from the ground to the top. Who would really want to go up such a ladder? And that's really the question we're going to get to now is this ladder, sort of like we could climb it if we needed to, but we don't really intend to go from one courtyard to the other using this ladder system. It's more so that we can make a joint Eruv between the courtyards, not so much that we're really going to use this ladder to get up and over the wall. So do we really have to be able to use it? As long as we could in a pinch, is that enough, or should it really be practical and practically useful? That seems to be an issue here. And that's an issue we're often going to encounter in these rulings of the sages. So Rav Yosef says to Rabbah another question. He says, okay, well, let's say there's a tree that's pretty easy to climb, actually, and it's right next to the wall. Can we use that as the ladder that would give us access to the other side of the wall? Now, this right away is problematic because we've already seen the teaching in Tractate Shabbos that on Shabbos we can't make use of trees, right? Trees are muktzah. We don't use trees on Shabbos for our various needs. Especially the side of a tree, should be off limits. We shouldn't be climbing the tree in order to get to the other side, and therefore, since it's not permitted, it's rabbinically not permitted to make use of trees on Shabbos, how could we use a tree as a ladder to get over the wall? The Gemara says, well, the rabbis said we can't use the side of a tree and we shouldn't be climbing trees. But Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the one who compiled the Mishna, said that we can, for the purpose of Erev Techumen, right, when we are changing our Shabbos dwelling for the purpose, since there's a limit of how far we can walk from our dwelling on Shabbos, and if we want to, we can go 2,000 cubits either in this direction or in any direction, but if I want to go, so I can only go 2,000 cubits in that direction. If I want to go have lunch at my friend's house on Shabbos, and he lives 3,000 cubits in that direction, what I can do before Shabbos starts is change the location of my official Shabbos dwelling by taking a basket of food and depositing it, at least 1,000 cubits in that direction. So tomorrow when I go to my friend's house for lunch, the first 1,000 cubits, I'm walking toward my dwelling, this basket of food, which has now become my Shabbos dwelling. And then I have 2,000 more cubits to get to my friend's house where I want to have lunch. So that basket of food, which is the Eruv for the purpose of changing the Shabbos boundary, it's a different concept than joining courtyards for the purpose of carrying objects from the house out into the courtyard or vice versa. It's a different kind of Eruv. But for that purpose, I can deposit that basket of food in a tree, right? I can put that basket of food in a tree for safekeeping. But we just heard you can't make use of a tree on Shabbos. How is it possible that this Eruv will work? Rebbe says you can do it because you put that basket of food in the tree during the day, and during twilight, that period of time which is neither day nor night, and since we're not sure when Shabbos actually begins, what is the exact moment when Shabbos begins, there's a period of doubt, which is twilight, about an hour long between day and night. And during that period of doubt, says Rebbe, that basket in the tree establishes my Eruv for me. The rabbis who disagree with Rebbe say you can't do that. But at least according to Rebbe, you can make use of a tree that way. So, according to Rebbe, could we make use of a tree in this way that at least during twilight, it would establish that ladder to join the courtyards, and the courtyards could be joined for the rest of Shabbos? And then immediately the Gemara answers, well, that should not work because the Eruv for changing my Shabbos boundary gets established during that twilight period. Then I don't really need it anymore. It was already established, and if it's established at the beginning of Shabbos, it counts for the rest of Shabbos. But a stairway over a ladder that's supposed to be joining the courtyards, well, that should be accessible throughout all of Shabbos. So if I'm not permitted to use the tree, then this should not work for joining the courtyards. But, says the Gemara, well, maybe it's not quite like that. Because if, for example, we have a proper ladder set up, like, what everybody agrees, a good ladder on this side, a good ladder on that side, and I can easily climb up and over the wall, and we can join the courtyards in this way. But on Shabbos, a lion comes along. This is great, right? A lion comes along and is crouching at the foot of the ladder. So nobody's walking up that ladder. No way. No one's going to come near that lion crouching at the foot of the ladder. Does the joint Eruv for joining these two courtyards become invalidated because of the crouching lion at the foot of the ladder? No. It was a good ladder. It was a good joining of the courtyards. And the fact that there's this sort of external force, the lion, which is preventing us from actually making use of the ladder, doesn't mean that the ladder has been invalidated. And the joint courtyard, the joint Eruv is still valid, even if there's that lion preventing us from actually using it. And likewise, if the stairs that was good at the beginning of Shabbos, at least during that twilight period, then the fact that we can no longer use it during Shabbos, maybe it's only like counts the same way as a crouching lion. The fact that there's a halacha, a law that says we can't use it on Shabbos by rabbinic decree, doesn't mean that it's invalidated for the purpose of joining courtyards. And indeed, that is the law. A living tree can be used as long as you can actually easily get up the tree and over the wall. You might not do it on Shabbos, but it can be used in its official, sort of nominal capacity to join the courtyards. One exception to that, if the tree is an Asherah tree. What is an Asherah? An Asherah was a type of tree that the idolaters who lived in the Holy Land before the children of Israel entered, that they worshipped, right? They were tree worshipers, not just tree huggers, tree worshipers. And so trees that were worshipped as gods, as false gods, right, as idols, they didn't just worship idols that they built with their hands. They thought that there were certain trees that were inhabited by gods or spirits or whatever, and they brought sacrifices and literally worshiped the trees. So any tree that was used in that way, we are not allowed to benefit in any way from something that was used in avodah zarah, right? The worship of idols. It becomes off limits to us. So a tree that was ever used for idol worship, even if the tree is dried out and dead, so it's not a living tree, which would take care of the problem of using a living tree on Shabbos. But if it was ever used in avodah zarah, we can't make use of it. It's as if the tree is not there. So as long as it wasn't used for idol worship, a living tree can be used as a ladder to overcome a wall and join courtyards. Mishnah 3. Now we've been talking about a wall that separates two courtyards. Now the case is a ditch. What if we have a ditch separating two courtyards? Here's Mishnah number 3 of chapter 7. With regard to a ditch between two courtyards that is 10 handbreadths deep and 4 handbreadths wide, so just as tall as the wall was, the minimum wall to divide two courtyards, it was significant, was 10 handbreadths high. So for a ditch to be significant, it has to be 10 handbreadths deep and the same width, at least 4 handbreadths wide. Such a ditch is considered a full-fledged partition, and the residents of the courtyard establish 2 Eruvin, 1 for each courtyard, and they may not establish a joint Eruv. Right? So just like if you have a significant wall between two courtyards, they may not join in a common Eruv unless they make an opening or get the ladders or diminish the wall or do something to it. They're not going to be able to join their courtyards. Likewise, if you have a significant ditch running the length of the two between the two courtyards, and it's at least 10 handbreadths deep and at least 4 handbreadths wide through that whole space between the two courtyards, they cannot make a joint Eruv unless they address this ditch and do something with it. Even if the ditch is filled with straw or hay, it is not regarded as sealed and is therefore not nullified. However, if the ditch is filled with dirt or pebbles, the residents establish 1 Eruv, but they may not establish 2 Eruvin. So if the ditch gets filled up with dirt or with rocks, now it's as if the ditch isn't there. Now there's no partition between the two courtyards, even though you could see where the partition was, where the ditch was. Now that it's been filled, this becomes one big courtyard, and not only are they not permitted to make 2 separate Eruvin, they are obligated to make a joint Eruv for all the houses that occupy the 2 courtyards, which now are considered one courtyard. If one placed a board 4 handbreadths wide across the ditch so that he could cross it, and similarly, if 2 balconies in 2 different courtyards are opposite one another and one placed a board 4 handbreadths wide between them, the residents of the courtyards or balconies establish 2 Eruvin, and if they desire, they may establish 1, right? So if you put a little bridge across the ditch, now you're in that optional zone, right? Where you could have separate Eruvs if you want to, or you can have a joint Eruv if you want to. It's permitted to make a joint Eruv. It's not obligated. As the board serves as an opening and a passageway between them. If the width of the plank is less than 4 handbreadths, the residents establish 2 Eruvin, and they are prohibited from making the joint Eruv. So the bridge over the ditch has to have some significance. It has to be at least 4 handbreadths wide. If it's skinnier than that, too ephemeral, too insubstantial, doesn't get you through it, right? So if we're going to be checking in for a moment with our metaphor, when we're in one of those low points in life and we just want to, get through that moment and sort of, get better at getting through the low points of our life, it's really not enough to just grit and bear it and just get through that moment and, it'll be over soon, it'll be over soon, it'll be over soon. It's over, thank God. Moving on. No, to bridge the low points of our lives, we need a substantial bridge. Just as to get over, to make a passageway over the high points of our lives, we need a substantial connection. What is substantial? Grinning and bearing it, or gritting and bearing it, right? Grinning and bearing it when we go in the high, gritting and bearing it when we go over the low. Not enough. Just waiting it out. Not enough. The way that we're going to get better at, overcoming the lows and highs of our life is to have anchors in our life, to have something substantial that helps us build those bridges across the ditches and those ladders across the walls, the high points. How do we do that? I mean, obviously, this channel is a faith channel, right? The Accidental Talmudist is a faith page. So remembering that we are souls, we don't have souls, we are souls. We have bodies. We were created by God. We were sent here with a mission. And we were given the tools that we need to overcome the lows and the highs. So in those tough moments in life, tough because they're so good and we can lose track of ourselves and become arrogant, or tough because they're so low and it's so challenging and upsetting and stressful and depressing, etc. In those lows and highs, remembering that we were sent here for a purpose, that we have the tools to deal with both the lows and the highs. God willing, we have people around us who can also be our teammates in getting through those moments. And just remembering who we really are and why we were sent here, and cleaving to the one who made us in those tough moments. Having a regular prayer practice, having a regular meditation practice, checking in with God every day, not just reciting prayers that are in a book, but as Rabbi Nachman would advise, having a regular time every day, like maybe even have an alarm on your phone that goes off in the afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock is a good time, and just stop whatever you're doing and say, hi, God, how are you doing? I'm doing okay, or today's not so good, but thank you for giving me what I need. I bet a lot of people rush right through this moment and never thank you for anything. That must be lonely for you. Really having that kind of a conversation with God, it's so healthy, and it just keeps you grounded, especially in those highs and lows. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. Did I finish? Yeah, so that's the Mishnah. So you need a bridge that's substantial to get across the ditch, at least 4 handbreadths wide. Where was I? The Mishnah number 3. Okay, interesting. Hay. The Mishnah said that if you fill the ditch with hay, you didn't fill the ditch, right? Hay is too insubstantial, too temporary, can wash away. Maybe you're just storing it there and then you're going to feed it to the horses or the cows. So hay doesn't count for filling a ditch, which is interesting because if you have a big hay pile that is 10 handbreadths high, it does count as a partition for as long as it's there. But when you have hay in a ditch, it doesn't count as filling the ditch. What's the difference? Well, a ditch stands to be filled, but not with hay. We don't normally fill ditches with hay. And there's other issues with hay. When we look at, when we talk about filling a ditch, the sages are going to bring in as a metaphor filling a house. Now, if you filled a house with hay, well, that's odd. Who would do that? But for some reason you did that. So if your intention was to fill the house with hay and to leave the hay there, so then you would nullify the house. Then it would no longer be a house. And so an implication of that is, for example, if there was, because we always just use sort of test cases to try and understand the law. So if you have a dead body in a house, if there's a corpse in a house, then everything that's inside the house with that dead body acquires ritual impurity, tuma. Just because you're sharing a space, you're under the same roof with a dead body, you acquire that ritual impurity, corpse tuma, corpse in a tent tuma, and you have to go through a purification process. Even though you didn't touch the dead body, it's as if you touched the dead body because you were under a roof with it. And you have to go through that purification process. But if you were standing on the roof of the house that had a dead body in it, well, the tuma wouldn't go through the roof. You would not acquire that ritual impurity. But if the house was filled with hay, and the owner of the house intended that hay to stay in there, It's no longer can be used as a house. It counts as the ground. It's as if there's no house there at all. And if there was a dead body in the house, it would be like a dead body buried in the ground. And if you're on the roof and you're standing over that dead body, then that ritual impurity would come up to you in the same way as if you walked over a grave, and you would have to go through that ritual purification process. And so it seems that it's dependent on the intent of the owner of the house, at least in terms of hay. Rabbi Yosef says, that's right, it depends on the owner's intent, whether it's hay or dirt, whether it's a house or a ditch. If he intends to fill that house or that ditch with hay and leave the hay there, then the ditch is considered filled, according to Rabbi Yosef. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, and I'm coming to the end, so if you have questions or comments, put it in. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, says, yeah, but hay is different than dirt because hay can be moved on Shabbos and dirt cannot. We've talked about this before. Dirt is muktzah on Shabbos. Dirt is used for gardening, for planting, for farming, for construction, foundations, etc. There is no reason to be moving dirt around on Shabbos. So you can't, even if you did not intend to leave the dirt in the ditch, you were just storing the dirt in the ditch on Shabbos, you can't move dirt around. Hay is food for animals, so you can move hay around on Shabbos. So there is a difference between hay and dirt with respect to Shabbos. And that's why, says Rav Huna in the Mishnah, if there was dirt in the ditch, even if the owner intended to take it out later, on Shabbos it's nullified. That ditch is considered filled. These two courtyards separated by a ditch that now has dirt in it, they need to make a joint Eruv, or nobody can carry in either of the courtyards. But if it's filled with hay, no, it is not considered filled. And in terms of this idea that you can't touch things on Shabbos, even money would be considered abandoned, right? Nobody ever abandons money. Like, if this money happens to be lying on the ground, the owner would like to have it back. A person who finds it is going to use it. But on Shabbos, because you can't touch money, there's no legitimate use of money on Shabbos. So if the ditch was filled with money, it would be as if the money was abandoned because you can't touch the money on Shabbos. So if somehow there was a ditch filled with money, then it would no longer be a ditch, and those two courtyards would be considered joined. And of course, I'm reminded of the old joke. There was a rabbi and a priest who were good friends, and they were hanging out one day, and the priest said, I once had a miracle happen to me. I was hiking in the mountains, and there was a blizzard, a sudden blizzard, and it was so cold and so windy and so blinding, and I just knew that I wasn't going to make it back and I was going to die. So I prayed with all my heart to God, God, save me, please save me, please save me, please save me. And a miracle happened for me. And even though there was a blizzard everywhere else, right around me, it wasn't snowing or cold, and I was saved. And the rabbi says, you know what? That is amazing. I had a very similar experience. I was once walking on Shabbos, and I found a bag of money that had thousands of dollars in it that was clearly abandoned, and, no one knew where it came from. And it was Shabbos, so I couldn't pick it up. I can't pick up money on Shabbos. So I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and a miracle was performed for me. And even though everywhere else it was Shabbos, right where I was standing, it was Tuesday. That's a joke. An old one. All right. And finally, Rav Ashi says that a ditch stands to be filled, so we are more lenient than in the case of a house that was filled with dirt or with hay. And Rava adds that, okay, that plank that bridges the ditch, right, so you can walk across it, that has to be 4 handbreadths wide in order to be deemed substantial. It doesn't actually have to cross the ditch. If you just put it on the side of the ditch and it acts in a permanent way, And so it narrows the ditch in that place where now the ditch is no longer 4 handbreadths wide. It's less than that. So you've diminished the ditch in the same way that we diminished the wall before. And now the ditch would be considered no longer a ditch. There's a passageway between the courtyards, and they could make the joint Eruv. All right, let's check out your comments and questions. Lucy says, the idea of developing techniques that make walls and ditches disappear to enable neighbors to create a joint Eruv is a great metaphor for the process of building community. Amen. I couldn't agree more. Nina tells me there's no more questions. So my friends, may you be blessed. May you be blessed to remember this lesson from Rebbe Nachman, to become better and better, get more and more skillful at riding out the highs and lows of life. Get better at ascending and get better at descending. And let the Lord be your rock, right? In both of those situations, when things are good and when things are bad. Just remember, you are a soul. You were sent here for a reason. You were given the tools that you need to complete your mission. And your mission will have highs and lows, but just keep focused on being there for others and being fruitful in this world. All the best.